It started in the quiet town of Waverly Creek, a place so ordinary that nothing ever seemed to happen there. The kind of town where people left their doors unlocked, where the local diner still served the same breakfast special it had for 30 years, and where everyone knew everyone, at least they thought they did. But that sense of safety began to rot from the inside one fall evening, when an old man named Harold Benson was found dead in his living room. At first, everyone thought it was natural. Harold was 82, lived alone, and had no family nearby. The coroner said heart attack, and people accepted it. The police barely investigated. Why would they? But then, 2 weeks later, another old man, Frank Delaney, was found dead in almost the same way. Same age range, same type of house, same side of town. The sheriff started to wonder, but no one wanted to believe something darker was happening. You see, Waverly Creek wasn't the kind of place that could handle the idea of a killer. The people there were simple, good-hearted folks who went to church on Sundays, mowed their lawns every Saturday, and waved to their neighbors every evening. They liked to think evil was something that existed far away in big cities, on the news, or in those true crime documentaries they watched before bed. But evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, dressed like anyone else. It was late October when the first whispers started. A woman named Judy, who lived 3 houses down from Frank Delaney, told people she'd seen someone walking around late at night. A tall figure wearing dark clothes, just standing at the end of her street, not moving. She said he looked like he was watching something or someone, but when she turned her porch light on, he was gone. People dismissed her story. Judy was known to drink, and everyone said she'd probably imagined it. But then came the third death. This one couldn't be explained away. Arthur McNeil, 79 years old, was found lying on his porch, his eyes open wide, his face frozen in terror. There were bruises around his neck, clear signs of strangulation. This time, the sheriff had no choice but to call in state investigators. The whole town went silent after that. People stopped sitting on their porches at night. They started locking their doors, checking their windows twice, even though most of them had never done that in their lives. The idea that someone was hunting old people, it didn't make sense. What kind of monster would do that? The investigators who came were outsiders, city men who didn't understand the rhythm of small-town life. They stayed at the local motel, set up tape around Arthur's house, and interviewed every neighbor within a 2-mile radius. They didn't find much. No fingerprints, no forced entry, nothing stolen. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. That's when people started talking about the caretaker. The name came from a rumor that the killer might have worked in an old folks' home nearby, a man who cared for the elderly by day and hunted them by night. Nobody knew where the rumor started, but once it spread, everyone believed it. That's how fear works. Doesn't need proof, just repetition. One night, about a week after Arthur's murder, a man named Pete Miller was driving home from work at the lumberyard. It was nearly midnight, fog rolling thick across the back roads. He swore later that he saw someone standing in the middle of the road, a man in dark clothes, holding something shiny. Pete slammed the brakes, heart pounding, but when the car stopped, the figure was gone. He sat there for a minute, staring into the fog, the silence pressing down like a weight. Then he drove home without looking back. The next morning, the old woman who lived 2 houses away from him, Martha Jenkins, was found dead. After that, the town lost its mind. Elderly folks started leaving to stay with family in other towns. The church organized night watches. Volunteers patrolled the streets with flashlights and baseball bats. But the killer was always one step ahead. He didn't leave clues, didn't make noise, didn't draw attention. He just appeared, killed, and vanished. The sheriff, a man named Richard Cole, looked more and more tired with each passing day. He'd been in Waverly Creek his whole life, knew every street, every face, but he couldn't wrap his head around this. He'd sit at the diner late at night, sipping coffee, staring at the rain sliding down the window, and mumbled to himself, "Why, old people? What's the point?" Nobody had an answer. It was around this time that a young woman named Laura moved back into town. She'd grown up here, left for college, and came back after her mother passed. Laura had been a journalist once, a small-time reporter for a newspaper in Chicago. When she heard about the murders, something in her wouldn't let it go. She started asking questions, writing notes, interviewing people the police had already talked to. The sheriff didn't like it. She'd only make things worse, but Laura didn't care. She started noticing patterns. All the victims lived within a 3-mile radius. All were between 75 and 85 years old. None of them had children living nearby. And strangest of all, they'd all been seen in the same grocery store a few days before their deaths. It was called Fish's Market, a little family-run place that had been around forever. Laura went there one afternoon, pretending to shop, and started watching. She noticed an employee, a man in his 30s, quiet, polite, always smiling just enough to seem harmless. He helped old customers with their groceries, carried bags to their cars, remembered everyone's name. But there was something in his eyes. Not warmth, not kindness. Something else. Something cold. She didn't know why, but she wrote his name down anyway. Daniel Price. Over the next few days, Laura kept an eye on him. She followed him after work, careful to stay far enough behind that he wouldn't notice. He always took the same route home, walking instead of driving, even though it was almost 2 miles. He lived in a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by overgrown grass and broken fences. Sometimes she'd see him standing in his yard at night, not doing anything, just staring at the streetlights. One night, she saw him talking to an old man outside the market after closing. The conversation seemed friendly at first, but the way Daniel leaned in, the way his face changed, Laura could tell something was off. She thought about calling the police, but hesitated. What would she even say? That she had a bad feeling. That a grocery clerk seemed too polite. 3 days later, that same old man was found dead. Laura didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. She sat by her window, watching the empty streets, trying to convince herself it was a coincidence. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. She started digging into Daniel's past school records, old news clippings, anything she could find. And what she found made her stomach twist. Daniel had grown up in Waverly Creek too. His mother died when he was 12. His father, a local handyman, was known for being strict. Some people said abusive. Daniel spent a lot of time at the nursing home, visiting his grandmother, who'd practically raised him. Then, when he was 20, his grandmother died under mysterious circumstances. The case was never investigated. Laura's gut told her she'd found him. She went to the sheriff the next morning, laid out everything she'd learned in her notes, her photos, her timeline. But Richard Cole shook his head. "You don't have proof," he said. "You've got guesses, that's all." Kay told her to leave it alone, said he'd look into it himself. But Laura could tell from his tone that he didn't believe her. That night, she decided to find proof herself. She waited until dark, then drove out to Daniel's house. The wind was strong, carrying the sound of rustling leaves and distant thunder. The place looked even creepier, up close, no lights on, no car in the driveway, but she could see movement behind the curtains. She parked a block away, crept through the tall grass, and peeked through a side window. What she saw made her blood run cold. Inside the living room were photos, hundreds of them, taped to the walls. Every one of them was of old people, some smiling, some walking their dogs, some sitting on porches. And next to each photo was a date. Some dates were crossed out, others weren't. That's when Laura realized the pattern wasn't random. It was a list, a schedule, and some of the dates hadn't happened yet. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped back, trying not to make noise. But her foot snapped a twig under the window. The sound was small, but inside, the light flicked off instantly. She froze. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until she heard the faint sound of a door creaking open. Someone was coming out. Laura turned and ran into the dark, her heart slamming against her ribs, the grass whipping against her legs. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She could feel if someone was following her. Laura ran until her lungs burned. The sound of footsteps behind her grew louder for a moment, then vanished. She ducked behind a large oak tree, gasping for air, listening. The night was alive with small sounds: the wind, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of leaves, but beneath all that, she could hear something else. Breathing, slow, controlled breathing. It was close. She held her hand over her mouth, trying not to make a sound. Her mind raced. She'd seen his face through the window, just for a second before the light went out. Daniel Price, the quiet grocery clerk who everyone thought was harmless. Now she knew the truth, and she knew he knew that she knew. A twig cracked somewhere to her left. Her pulse spiked. She didn't wait to see who it was. She bolted again, sprinting through the dark field, branches cutting at her arms, until she saw the faint glow of her car's headlights in the distance. She fumbled for her keys, her fingers trembling, and dove inside. The moment she turned the ignition, her headlights flashed across the road, illuminating a figure standing right in front of her car. Daniel, he didn't move. He just stood there, eyes fixed on her, face half shadowed. Laura's hands shook as she threw the car into reverse and hit the gas. The tires spun in the mud before finally catching traction, and she sped off down the narrow road, heart hammering in her chest. In the rearview mirror, she could still see him standing there, motionless, till the darkness swallowed him up. She didn't stop until she reached the sheriff's office. The clock inside read 2:37 a.m. Sheriff Cole was still there, half asleep at his desk with an empty coffee cup in front of him. Laura burst through the door, slamming it behind her. He jumped, startled. "What the hell, Laura?" he said, rubbing his eyes. "You can't just barge in here at he's the one," she interrupted, voice trembling. "Daniel Price. I went to his house. He has photos of every victim. He's planning more. You have to come now." The sheriff stared at her for a moment, then sighed. "Slow down. You broke into his house." "I didn't break in. I looked through the window." "You have to believe me, Sheriff. He was there, and he saw me." Cole rubbed his temples. "You can't just accuse someone without evidence." I have evidence," she snapped. "Photos on the wall, names, dates, everything. Please, before he hurts someone else." The look on her face was enough. Cole grabbed his gun, his flashlight, and his radio. "Fine, let's go." They drove out to Daniel's house, the sheriff's patrol car cutting through the fog. But when they arrived, the place was empty. No lights, no sound, no car. Cole checked the doors locked. He shined his flashlight through the same window Laura had looked through. The walls were bare. Not a single photo, not a single trace of what she'd seen. Laura's voice broke. "I swear to you, it was all there. Hundreds of photos." Cole looked around, clearly uneasy. "If what you're saying is true, he cleaned it all up in less than an hour. That doesn't make sense." "Okay." But as they turned to leave, the sheriff's flashlight caught something, a glint of metal near the edge of the yard. He bent down and picked it up. A small silver locket, smeared with dirt. He opened it. Inside was a picture of an elderly woman, one of the victims. Laura felt the blood strained from her face. Cole's voice dropped to a whisper. "We'll take this in by morning." The story had spread again, though no one knew the full truth. Just whispers about a suspect, a man the sheriff was watching closely. Laura barely slept. Every noise outside made her flinch. Every shadow looked like him. 2 days passed without incident. The town tried to breathe again, but then, early one morning, a call came into the station. Another death. This time, it wasn't in town. It was out by the old county road, near the abandoned grain mill. The victim was a man named Walter Briggs, 76, who'd gone missing the night before. His truck was found on the side of the road, engine still running. Walter's body was inside the mill, seated upright in a wooden chair, his head tilted back, his mouth open as if gasping for air. Cole arrived at the scene just after sunrise. Laura followed, despite his protests. The air inside the mill was thick with the smell of dust and rot. In front of Walter's body was a piece of paper pinned to the wall. On it, in neat handwriting, were 4 words: he couldn't be saved. Cole stared at it for a long time before turning to Laura. You said his grandmother died mysteriously, right? Maybe this is about saving them. In his mind, anyway. Laura nodded slowly. He's not killing them out of hate. He thinks he's helping them. They spent the next few hours combing the area. Behind the mill, they found a small trail leading into the woods. Fresh footprints. Cole called for backup, but Laura, driven by fear and anger, went ahead on her own. The trail wound deep into the forest, down to a clearing near the river. There, half buried in the dirt, she found something that made her stomach twist: an old, leather-bound journal. Inside were notes, sketches, newspaper clippings about the murders, and personal entries written in precise, obsessive handwriting. The pages told a story. Daniel's grandmother had suffered from dementia. In the journal, he described watching her forget who he was, watching her waste away, and the helplessness he felt. He wrote that no one deserves to rot from the inside. That old age is cruelty disguised as mercy. The entries grew darker over time. He began referring to his victims as the lost ones, writing about freeing them from pain. Each page ended with the same sentence: they won't suffer anymore. Laura's hands shook as she flipped through the pages. At the very end, there was a list. 7 names. 6 of them were already dead. The 7th name was someone she recognized instantly: Sheriff Richard Cole. Before she could even process it, she heard a branch snap behind her. She turned. There he was, Daniel, standing just 10 feet away, calm, almost serene, holding a length of rope in one hand. You shouldn't have come here, he said quietly. His voice was steady, disturbingly gentle. You weren't on the list. Laura took a step back. You don't have to do this. You think you're saving them, but you're not. You're murdering innocent people. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. Innocent. You think they wanted to live like that? Alone, forgotten, waiting to die. They didn't ask for this. She shouted. Daniel smiled faintly. Neither did my grandmother. Key moved closer. Laura backed up until her foot hit the edge of the riverbank. The water below was dark and fast. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. Please, she said. You don't have to do this. Daniel stopped, studying her face for a long time. Then he said something that chilled her to her core. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're not ready yet. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees as quietly as he'd appeared. Laura ran back to the sheriff's car, clutching the journal. When Cole saw her, covered in dirt and shaking, he knew. You saw him, didn't you? He asked. She nodded. They sent the journal to the state lab, but the results came back inconclusive. No prints, no DNA. The evidence they had wasn't enough for an arrest warrant. They searched the woods for days, but Daniel was gone, vanished. Weeks passed. The killing stopped, but the fear didn't. People still looked over their shoulders. Every creak in an empty house felt like a warning. Laura stayed in town, determined to write everything down to make sure people knew what happened here. But one night, as she sat in her small, rented house, typing her notes, she heard something knock at the door. Soft, slow. 3 times. She froze. No one came by this late. She got up, walked to the window, and peeked outside. Nothing. The street was empty. The night was quiet. She waited another moment, then slowly opened the door. There was no one there, only a small envelope on the ground. Inside was a single photo. It was hers, taken from outside her window, sometime earlier that evening. On the back, written in neat, familiar handwriting, were the same 4 words: "You couldn't be saved." Her hands began to shake. She looked around the empty street, her heart thudding in her chest. The streetlights flickered. Somewhere, deep in the dark, she thought she heard someone breathing, and then silence. The night swallowed it all. The days that followed the letter felt like a fog. Laura barely slept. Every noise outside her window made her heart jump. Every shadow seemed to move. The sheriff stationed a patrol car near her house for a few nights, but nothing happened. Eventually, the deputies stopped coming. The town wanted to move on, but Laura couldn't. She kept the envelope on her desk, staring at those 4 words written in that same calm, precise handwriting: "You couldn't be saved." She started recording everything: her thoughts, her memories, her nightmares. The journal she found was gone now, locked away as evidence at the State Bureau, but the image of it haunted her. She couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was still watching her, waiting for the right moment. A week later, federal agents came to town. The murders had caught national attention by then news vans parked on the edge of Waverly Creek, reporters talking about the caretaker killer. People were angry that the local sheriff hadn't solved it sooner, and Cole was forced to work with the FBI, whether he liked it or not. The lead agent was a man named Sam Walters, tall, quiet, with the kind of presence that filled a room without trying. He had spent 20 years hunting serial offenders, and he carried that weight in his eyes. When he met Laura, he listened carefully as she told him everything about the photos, the journal, the letter. He didn't interrupt once. When she was done, he said one thing: "He's not finished." Those words chilled her to the bone. Walters had seen patterns like this before. "He's escalating," he said. "The fact that he made contact with you means you got inside his head. That makes you part of the story now. And people like him, they don't like loose ends." Laura's throat tightened. "You think he's going to come back for me?" Walters nodded slowly. "He's not done. But if we're careful, we can use that." They set up surveillance around her house, hidden cameras, microphones, motion sensors. Every night, agents watched from unmarked vans parked down the street. For days, nothing happened. Laura tried to live normally, but it was impossible. Every time she walked into a room, she checked the corners. Every time she looked out the window, she half expected to see him standing there again. Then, on the 5th night, one of the motion sensors tripped at 2:14 a.m. The feed showed movement near her. Backyard fence, faint silhouette just beyond the reach of the security lights. An agent rushed outside, gun drawn. But by the time he got there, the figure was gone. All that was left was a single footprint in the mud. Walters crouched down beside it. "He's testing us," he said quietly. "He wants us to know he's still here." The next day, they brought in dogs, combed the woods, checked every abandoned property in town. Nothing. It was as if Daniel had melted into the earth. But that night, something even stranger happened. Laura got an email. No subject, no sender, just an attachment to photo. It was of her again, sitting in her living room, taken from outside through the window. She felt her heart stop. She hadn't noticed anyone. No sounds, no shadows, and in the reflection of the window behind her, she could barely make out a figure standing in the darkness, watching. She showed it to Walters immediately. He looked at it, then at her. "He's playing with you. This isn't about the killings anymore. It's about control." That same night, they traced the IP address. It came from a public library 2 towns over. The local police checked the security cameras there, but the footage had been wiped. Someone had gone in, deleted the recordings manually. For the next few days, the tension in Waverly Creek was unbearable. The few remaining elderly residents refused to leave their homes. The town felt like it was holding its breath. Walters set up a small operations base inside the sheriff's office, covered the walls with photos, maps, and timelines. Each red string connected another pattern, another death, another clue. But one detail kept bothering him, the choice of victims. Every single one had been alone. No family, no close friends, no one who would have noticed if they disappeared for a day or two. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Walters leaned over the map one night, exhausted, and said quietly, "He's not just killing the old. He's erasing loneliness." Laura looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "He's targeting people who have no one left. People who remind him of his grandmother. He thinks he's doing them a favor, ending their pain before the world forgets them completely." Laura shivered. "Then why me?" Walters hesitated. "Because you didn't forget. You dug up what he wanted buried. In his mind, that makes you dangerous. You're his unfinished work." The next morning, something unexpected happened. A call came from a gas station 30 miles away. A clerk said a man matching Daniel Price's description had stopped there early that morning. Paid in cash. Didn't say a word. But when he left, the clerk found something on the counter, a folded piece of paper with 4 words written on it. "I will be done." Walters knew what that meant. "He's planning something bigger," he said. They traced Daniel's background deeper, this time hospital records, psychiatric evaluations, social services. That's when the pictures started to come together. Daniel had been institutionalized briefly after his grandmother's death. He'd told doctors that she spoke to him in his dreams, begging him to help the others. The staff dismissed it as grief, and after a few months, he was released. No one followed up. Walters found the old file-scribbled therapist notes, half-legible sentences describing guilt, obsession, and detachment. Daniel had written letters during that time to letters to his dead grandmother, describing how the world didn't care for people like her anymore, how he would make it right. Laura sat in silence as Walters read them aloud. It didn't sound like rage. It sounded like devotion. That night, the agents decided to use her as bait, not because they wanted to, but because Daniel had already fixated on her. They wired her house again, set up hidden cameras, and had Walters waiting nearby with a tactical team. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The night was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the wall clock. Laura sat on her couch, pretending to read, every muscle in her body tense. Then around 1:23 a.m., the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Her breath hitched. The radio on Walter's end crackled. "We've lost visuals. Generators down." Laura grabbed the small flashlight they'd left on the table. The beam flickered across the room. Everything looked the same, but she could feel it, that weight in the air, that sense that she wasn't alone anymore. She whispered into her mic, "I think he's here." No response. She stood slowly, trying to stay quiet, the floorboards creaking under her feet. She moved toward the kitchen window. Outside, the yard was pitch black, nothing but the wind in the trees. She turned around and nearly screamed. The front door was open, just a crack, but open. She lifted the flashlight toward it, her hand shaking uncontrollably. The beam landed on something on the floor. A photograph. Her stomach twisted when she saw what it was, a picture of Sheriff Cole, taken at the station earlier that day. Before she could react, she heard a voice behind her. "Do you see now?" She spun around. Daniel stood in the hallway, his face pale and expressionless, a glinting in the flashlight's beam. "You keep pretending they want to live," he said softly. "You keep pretending it's mercy to make them suffer." Laura's voice trembled. "You don't get to decide who lives or dies." He took a step closer. "Someone has to." Outside, Walters and his team were trying to restore power. They didn't know Daniel was already inside. Laura backed up slowly, trying to keep him talking. "What about your grandmother, Daniel? You'd think she'd want this?" His expression flickered for the first time. Pain, maybe regret. "She begged me every night. She told me they were all waiting." "She didn't mean that," Laura said. "You twisted her voice into something else. You turned grief into madness." He raised his head slightly, eyes distant. "You don't understand. I don't kill them. I free them." Before he could move closer, the lights flickered back on. The sudden brightness stunned them both. From outside came shouting Walter's voice. "Freeze. Step away from her." Daniel turned toward the window. In that split second, Laura dove to the floor. A gunshot cracked through the air. Daniel stumbled backward, eyes wide, a red bloom spreading across his shirt. He fell to his knees, still staring at her. "They're still waiting," he whispered, his voice fading. "All of them." And then he collapsed. Walters rushed in, gun still drawn, checking Daniel's pulse. Nothing. The paramedics arrived minutes later, but it was too late. Laura sat on the floor, shaking, staring at his body. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the house lights. Finally, steady again. When it was all over, Walters handed her the same photograph they'd found on the floor. "You did good," he said quietly. "It's over." But Laura couldn't shake the feeling that it was. 2 weeks later, the town began to return to normal. The news stations moved on. The diner reopened. People talked about the killings in hushed tones, like it was a nightmare that had finally ended. Laura started packing her things, ready to leave Waverly Creek behind. But as she taped the last box shut, she noticed something sticking out from under her front door, a small white envelope. Her hands went cold. Inside, there was a single piece of paper, 4 words written in that same neat handwriting. He was only one. Laura's breath caught. She looked out the window. Across the street, under the flickering streetlight, stood an old man she'd never see. He was smiling, and then he raised his hand and waved. Scene for Laura froze by the window, the letter trembling in her hand. The old man stood perfectly still under the flickering streetlight, his faint smile never changing. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The wind rustled the trees, carrying dry leaves across the empty road. Then, without a word, the old man turned and walked away, slow, deliberate steps fading into the darkness. Her pulse hammered in her ears. It couldn't be. Daniel was dead. She'd seen his body, seen the blood on the floor, the stillness in his eyes. And yet, the letter in her hand, those 4 words, felt like his voice speaking from the grave. She ran outside, barefoot, the cool pavement biting into her feet, but the street was empty. No sign of him, just the echo of her own breathing and the faint creak of a sign swinging in the wind. For a long time, she stood there, shivering, staring into the blackness. The next morning, Laura drove straight to the sheriff's office, the envelope clutched in her fist. Sheriff Cole was already there, sitting behind his cluttered desk, dark circles under his eyes. He looked older, heavier somehow. "He's dead, Laura," he said after she told him. "You saw him die?" "We both did." "Then explain this." She slid the envelope across the desk. Cole read the words slowly, his jaw tightening. "Maybe it's some sick copycat, or someone trying to scare you." "An old man was standing right outside my house last night," she said, voice trembling. "He waved at me. I don't think it's over." Cole leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Even if it's not, Daniel Price is gone. Whatever this is, something else now." She didn't want to believe him, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't sure either. That afternoon, she met with Agent Walters again. He'd been reassigned after the case closed, but when he heard what happened, he drove back to Waverly Creek without hesitation. He studied the envelope, sniffed the paper, turned it under the light. "Different handwriting," he said finally. "Same message style, but older, shakier. So it's not Daniel?" Laura asked. Walters shook his head slowly. "Maybe not. Or maybe someone who knew him." He opened his laptop and pulled up the case files again. Daniel lived alone, but that doesn't mean he didn't talk to anyone. Sometimes killers like him have followers, people who share their beliefs. The mission. Laura frowned. "You think there's more than one?" Walters sighed. "He called himself the caretaker, right? What if it wasn't just a name? What if it was a group? The idea made her stomach twist. They started digging again: bank records, old phone logs, his employment history at the grocery store. It didn't take long to find something strange. 3 months before the first murder, Daniel had made a series of small cash deposits from different towns across the state. Each one came from locations near retirement homes or nursing centers. Walter's voice was grim. That's movement. Travel pattern. He wasn't just here, Laura. He was recruiting. The realization hit her like a wave. Recruiting. Other killers. Or believers, he said. People who shared his vision about saving the elderly. They decided to visit the closest nursing home connected to the Pattern Maple Hill Care Center, about 40 miles outside of town. When they arrived, the place looked harmless. Enough white walls, trimmed lawns, a small garden where residents sat under the sun. But there was something off about it. Too quiet, too controlled. Inside, they met the head nurse, a woman named Evelyn Carter. She was polite, maybe too polite, with a fixed smile that never reached her eyes. When Walter showed his badge and asked about Daniel Price, her face didn't change. "Oh yes," she said softly. "He volunteered here years ago, helped with meal deliveries and reading to the residents. Such a sweet young man." Laura and Walters exchanged a glance. "Did he ever talk to anyone here after he left?" Walters asked. Evelyn's smile flickered, just slightly. "Not that I'm aware of." They thanked her and left, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. She stopped by the front desk on their way out, where an elderly man sat in a wheelchair, staring out the window. His name tag said Howard. When she leaned down and introduced herself, his eyes shifted toward her, distant but aware. "You're the girl from the news," he said slowly. She hesitated. "Yes. How did you?" He smiled faintly. "He told us you'd come." Her stomach dropped. "Who told you that?" Howard's eyes glazed over. "The caretaker," he whispered. "He said his work isn't done yet." Walters grabbed her arm gently. "Laura, we need to go. Now." They rushed out to the car. Once inside, Walters called the state office for a warrant to search the facility. But before he could finish the call, something caught Laura's eye through the windshield. Evelyn Carter standing at the window, watching them leave. That same faint smile. 2 hours later, police raided the nursing home. What they found made even Walters go pale. In the basement, behind a locked supply door, was a small room lit by a single bare bulb. The walls were covered in handwritten notes, sold people's names, dates, photographs, medical records. In the center of the room was a wooden chair and an oxygen mask connected to a long plastic tube that wasn't attached to anything. And on the wall, written in dark red marker, were the words, "Mercy is not a sin." The handwriting matched Daniel's. Walter stared at it, speechless. He's been here, maybe even trained them. They arrested Evelyn Carter that night. She didn't insist. When asked about the room, she simply said they wanted peace. I gave it to them. But as the investigation went deeper, it became clear that Evelyn wasn't the only one. Several employees from other care centers were missing. Some had vanished months ago, leaving behind the same kind of journals Daniel kept filled with messages about ending suffering, freeing souls, and the caretaker's path. Laura read through one of them, her hands shaking. Every page echoed Daniel's words, but one entry stood out. When one caretaker falls, another rises. That night, as she sat in her motel room, the realization hit her. This wasn't about Daniel Price anymore. He had started something, but it had spread far beyond him. The next morning, Walters came to her door, looking exhausted. "We've traced similar incidents in 3 other states," he said. "Unexplained deaths, same handwriting, same phrases. This is bigger than anyone thought." Laura stared at the window, voice barely a whisper. "So it's a movement." He nodded grimly. "An ideology. They believe they're saving people from pain. And now they've gone underground." Days passed. Reporters flooded the town again, calling it the caretaker cult. Politicians promised justice. Families demanded answers. But behind the chaos, the killings continued quietly, in places too far apart to connect on the news. One evening, Laura sat in the sheriff's office, staring at the case board. Pictures of Daniel, Evelyn, and the others covered the wall. Red lines connected towns, dates, and names, a web of mercy killings stretching farther than anyone could track. Sheriff Cole looked at her. "You're leaving, aren't you?" She nodded. "I have to. This won't stop here," he sighed. "You've done enough, Laura. Let it go, okay?" But she couldn't. Not when she knew what was out there. Later that night, she packed her car and started driving. The roads were dark and empty, headlights slicing through the fog. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep following the trail. She passed through small towns, gas stations, rest stops, saw everywhere she went. She looked for signs, and then, just past midnight, she stopped at a diner off the highway. Inside, it was quiet, only a few truckers, and an old woman sitting alone near the back. Laura ordered coffee, trying to calm her nerves. But when the waitress handed her the cup, she noticed something etched into the ceramic dot for words, scratched faintly, but clear enough to read. He was only one. Her hands began to shake. She looked up. The old woman at the back of the diner was watching her, and when their eyes met, the woman smiled softly, kindly, almost lovingly. Then she whispered something Laura couldn't hear. Laura leaned closer, heart pounding. "What did you say?" The woman's eyes glimmered under the dim light. "You couldn't be saved either," she said. Before Laura could react, the woman stood and walked out the door, disappearing into the night. Laura sat frozen, staring at the coffee cup, the words burning into her mind. Somewhere out there, the caretaker's work was continuing, and now she was part of it, whether she liked it or not. The road stretched endlessly ahead of her, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through miles of fog and darkness. Laura's headlights were the only source of light in that vast emptiness. Every mile she drove took her farther from Waverly Creek, but closer to something she didn't fully understand. Sleep had become a stranger. For weeks, she'd been chasing clues, police reports, online forums, anonymous tips. Everywhere she looked, the same pattern appeared. Unexplained deaths among the elderly. Hospitals claiming natural causes, but with no medical justification. Each case was connected by a symbol carved somewhere near the scene, 3 intersecting circles. The same mark Daniel Price once drew in his notebook. It wasn't random anymore. It was organized. One evening, she reached an abandoned rest area off Interstate 76. The building was shut down years ago, but her contact, a retired detective named George Milton, had insisted they meet there. "You'll want privacy for this," he told her on the phone, voice shaky. When she arrived, his car was already parked outside, engine running, but the driver's seat was empty. Her stomach sank. "George," she called out, stepping closer. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and something else, something metallic. Blood. She opened the car door. George sat slumped in the passenger seat, head tilted to the side. His throat had been slit cleanly. On the dashboard lay a folded note. She unfolded it with trembling hands. "You shouldn't have come this far. Let the old die in peace." No signature. Just 3 circles drawn in black ink. She stumbled back, gasping for air. Somewhere behind her, she heard a noise, a soft crunch of gravel. She spun around, flashlight trembling in her hand. Nothing, just the wind and the low hum of cicadas. That night, she drove to the nearest motel and locked herself inside. Every creak of the building, every car that passed outside, made her heart jump. She sat at the desk, staring at her laptop, piecing together everything she'd learned. The caretaker wasn't one man. It was a network hidden among nursing homes, hospice centers, and retirement communities. Doctors, nurses, caregivers all convinced they were performing acts of mercy. Daniel Price had simply been the first one to draw blood. Laura recorded every finding, every name, every photo. She planned to hand it all over to the FBI the next morning. But around 2 a.m., there was a knock at her door. 3 soft taps. She froze. Another knock. Louder this time. "Who is it?" she asked. No answer. She moved closer to the door, heart pounding, hand on the knob. A voice whispered through the crack. "Laura, we just want to talk." It was a woman's voice, calm, gentle, almost familiar. "Who are you?" "We're the ones you've been looking for." Her breath caught. "The caretakers." Silence. Then the voice again. "You don't have to be afraid. We don't kill everyone. Only those who are ready." Laura backed away slowly. "You murdered people. They were suffering," the voice said softly. "We ended their pain. You should understand that by now." She lunged for the phone, dialing 911. But before the call connected, the lights went out. Total darkness. She grabbed her flashlight and aimed it toward the window, just in time to see 3 figures standing outside. Their faces hidden under white surgical masks. They weren't rushing. They were waiting, watching. She slipped into the bathroom, locking the door, whispering to herself, "Stay calm. Stay quiet." Minutes felt like hours. Then footsteps. Inside the room, they'd gotten in. Her flashlight flickered as she pressed herself against the cold tile wall. The knob turned once, twice. Then a voice spoke from the other side. "You don't have to hide, Laura. You've already been chosen." Her heart nearly stopped. The door burst open and bright light filled the room. She raised the flashlight, ready to fight, but froze. It wasn't one of the masked figures. It was Agent Walters. "Laura," he shouted. "You're safe now." Behind him, 2 FBI agents swept through the motel, guns drawn. The 3 masked intruders were gun-vanished, like smoke. Walters pulled her close, his voice steady but urgent. "We've been tracking them for weeks. They knew you were close to exposing the core." "The core?" she asked breathlessly. He nodded. "There's someone leading them. Someone inside the federal healthcare system. We think Daniel's ideas were stolen and turned into a covert euthanasia program. They're using caretaker cells across multiple states." Her mind reeled. "You mean the government's involved?" Walters looked away. "Parts of it. Rogue doctors, administrators. It's deep." They left the motel that night under FBI protection, driving to a secure facility in Virginia. 4 days, Laura was questioned by federal agents, psychologists, and analysts. They wanted to know everything, every conversation, every clue, every letter. But then, something strange happened. One morning, Walters didn't show up for their scheduled debriefing. When Laura asked, an officer told her he's been reassigned. She didn't believe it. That night, as she sat alone in her room, the television flickered on by itself. Static filled the screen, then slowly formed into an image of face. It was Walters, but his expression was blank, lifeless. His voice came through, distorted. "We finished what he started." The screen went dark. Laura stumbled backward, whispering, No, it can't be." She tried to call the guards, but her phone was dead. The lights dimmed. Down the hallway, she heard the faint echo of footsteps. When the door creaked open, a nurse stepped inside, smiling kindly. "Time for your medication, dear." "I don't take medication," Laura said. The nurse's smile didn't fade. "You do now?" "K." On the tray beside her, a small pill bottle bore a familiar symbol, 3 intersecting circles. Laura's hands shook. "Where's Walters?" The nurse tilted her head. "He's resting. We took good care of him." She backed into the corner, realizing what was happening. This wasn't a safe house. It was another facility, one owned and operated by the same network she'd been hunting. And now, she was there, patient. The nurse moved closer. "You fought so hard to understand us, Laura, but you never realized you were always one of us." You wanted to stop suffering too, didn't you? Laura's breathing quickened. You're monsters. The nurse leaned close, whispering, Mercy isn't monstrous. It's salvation. She reached for Laura's arm, but Laura shoved the tray into her chest and bolted through the door. The hallway lights flickered as alarms began to wail. She ran through sterile corridors lined with empty hospital beds and locked doors. The air thick with the smell of antiseptic and something burning. Ahead, she saw an exit sign glowing red. She pushed through the door, stumbling into the cold night air. Behind her, voices shouted. She kept running until she reached the woods, collapsing among the trees. The facility loomed in the distance, quiet, windowless, surrounded by fences. It wasn't a hospital. It was a containment center. She stayed there until dawn, then found a payphone near an old gas station and called the only person she still trusted, Sheriff Cole. When he answered, she could barely speak. Cole, they got Walters. It's bigger than we thought. There was a pause. Then Cole said, quietly, Laura, where are you? She hesitated. Somewhere near Arlington. I escaped. Stay where you are. I'll come for you. Relief washed over her. Thank you, Cole. I knew I could. But then she heard something in the background of his line. A voice. Soft, familiar. A woman's voice. Tell her, we're waiting. Laura froze. Who was that? Cole didn't answer. Then the line went dead. She stood there in silence, the receiver still pressed to her ear. Slowly, she turned toward the horizon, where the sun was rising behind a curtain of fog. Somewhere out there, the network was still alive. The caretakers hadn't just survived. They'd spread. And now, she realized, there was no one left she could trust. The camera of her mind panned upward with the trees, over the highways, over the cities, waking to another ordinary day. Behind every closed door, in every nursing home and a hospital ward, someone was whispering those same words, passing them along like scripture. Mercy is not a sin. Fade out. The story ends, yet the silence that follows feels like a warning, because mercy always comes quietly.